Good evening, everyone. My name is Michelle Jordan, and welcome to Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts educational workshop hosted by the Philadelphia Free Library. Thank you so much for their partnership. This program is going to be focused on understanding and navigating PA courts. And we're going to talk a little bit about judicial elections, which I hope everybody knows is next Tuesday. Next slide. As we begin, if you have any technical difficulties, just please send an email to staff@pmconline.org. Or if you lose computer connection, you can also call in. Next slide. This particular workshop and all of the workshops that are on our basic court basics is sponsored by Comcast across the state. So we thank Comcast for their support. Next slide. So Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts has been around for almost 30 plus years. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization which envisions a Pennsylvania judicial system in which everyone who participates in Pennsylvania's courts is assured impartiality, fairness, accessibility, and respect. PMC was created over 35 years ago to support merit selection of judges as a result of a crisis in confidence in Pennsylvania's judiciary arising from numerous scandals. We advocate for independence of the judiciary. We focus on educating Pennsylvanians about our courts and how to navigate them with competence, to understand the importance of the courts, and have confidence in the rule of law. You can find more information and this recording on our website, pmconline.org. We hold many civic education workshops in conjunction with community partners such as libraries and schools, and we invite judges and lawyers to join us to present at these educational programs. Next slide. Some of the work, as I said, is about judicial selections, judicial discipline. We have an amazing bail watch program where we actually train volunteers to go into the courts to assess, and then we create a report. And actually, we just launched our report. So if you have a chance, go onto our website and you can read the report of our assessment over 2021 to 2022. Next slide. These are just some of the examples of some of the educational programming that we're having in the next couple of months. As I mentioned, we cover the whole state. So some of them are hybrid, some of them are in person, but if you have any interests in any of them, please go online and register. They're very important, and there's always information to be learned. Next slide. So this is our agenda. We're going to talk about the structure of PA courts, the election of judges in PA, and then the role within the court system. Next slide. So now I'd like to introduce our amazing presenter, a very good friend of Pennsylvania for Modern Courts. All of our presenters are volunteers. And so Alicia Hickok is the co-chair of Favorite Drinkers Appellate Team and has represented public entities as well as for-profit and nonprofit companies and individuals in over 50 appeals in state and federal appellate courts. She has particular depth and breadth in the Pennsylvania court system. Having argued extensively in all of Pennsylvania's appellate courts, she has also handled appeals in other states and in several of the federal courts of appeals, as well as briefing in the United States Supreme Court. Thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you very much. And I am really honored to be here and very grateful both to the Free Library and to Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts for all the work you do and all the ways that you help us as citizens. Thank you. If we could go to the next slide. So in Pennsylvania was, a very original one of the colonies, and it created a Supreme Court in 1722 and created a constitution in 1776. By way of comparison, the United States didn't create its constitution or its Supreme Court until 1789. So Pennsylvania is older than that and is one of the oldest in the country. If we could go to the next slide. So there are a couple of different ways that you would go to the courts. Basically, there is a breakdown between civil and criminal. Civil is where you or somebody against you says, oh, there's something that happened that was wrong, whether it's a breach of contract, whether it's a tort. It can be between an individual and a company. It can be between two companies. And they are asking the court to determine who is more right. And sometimes there is a jury there. Sometimes it's only the judge that's making that decision. And the plaintiff has to have a preponderance of the evidence, meaning more than 50%. So if you take a scale and you weigh it, if there's a little more on this side, then that will give you your, preponderance of the evidence. Now, there are some areas, juvenile delinquency, termination, parental termination, and others, where by statute there is a right to an attorney. But most of the civil areas, there is no right to an attorney. There is only a right to hire an attorney and bring an attorney in, but you would not get one appointed. In a criminal case, on the other hand, there is a right to an attorney, and it's a constitutional right, not just a statutory right. And that is a situation where you have a prosecutor who represents the state and is either from the Attorney General's office or from the district attorney's office that represent the interest of the state in its laws. So it's a criminal proceeding. It can result in a person going to jail as well as being fined. But the prosecutor must follow a number of due process steps and must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. There is a third category, which is what happens when you interact with an administrative agency. And if you interact with an administrative agency, you may go to court from that agency proceeding. But typically speaking, you're going to be either in a civil suit or a criminal case. We can go to the next slide. So in our court system, we have a very unusual court system in a couple of different ways. First of all, we have a single Supreme Court. As far as I know, Texas is the only one that has two Supreme Courts. It has a civil Supreme Court and a criminal Supreme Court. But most states do have one Supreme Court, but most states also only have one intermediate appellate court, and we have two. We have the Superior Court and the Commonwealth Court. And then underneath that is the courts of common pleas, which are typically what we call the trial courts. And then underneath that is the municipal courts and the magisterial direct district courts. Next slide. So this is from the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas website, and you can see that here they talk about the civil division, the criminal division, the traffic division. If you go to the website, you can click on these buttons and they will take you to information on any of these things. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. So within the civil division, there's a trial division, which is the thing that you probably are most familiar with if you've sat on a jury. That's where you have the civil cases where people are arguing about who's right and who's wrong. And then the criminal trials where you have the prosecution. There's also a family court, which is the one that we talked about where you can have juvenile delinquency, or you can have parental termination, or you can have custody. All of those things get adjudicated through the family court. And then the orphans court is not technically a court about orphans. It's a court about anything that needs special protection by the state. And so you can have competency proceedings, you can have a guardian appointed, you can have an estate that's being adjudicated, you can have a trust that's being administered or litigated. All of those things will be handled in orphans court. Next slide. So this is a hierarchy of the different programs that you will see. If you look at it, you can see what the specialized programs are. You can see who's in charge of which program. And you can see kind of where they are. These are, CR is courtroom. So if you go to City Hall and you're told to go to 607, you would go up to the 6th floor and find 607. Next slide. So I mentioned before that there are two intermediate appellate courts. The Superior Court is the one that most people are familiar with. It's one of the busiest courts in the nation. It has so many cases, and it has judges that are elected from all over the Commonwealth. And they sit in different places. So they'll sit in Philadelphia, they'll sit in Harrisburg, and they'll sit in Pittsburgh. And then occasionally they'll go out and sit somewhere else. So I've been to Northampton County, I've been to Easton, I've been to other places where the court has been sitting as a superior court. And it will hear most of the matters that come up from the Court of Common Pleas. And you will, see an opinion come out from them after they have received briefing and they have heard oral argument. They have full oral arguments and then expedited oral arguments where you can come in and only argue for 5 minutes. Full oral argument is 15, and you can also say you don't want oral argument. But the courthouse is open to everyone, and I encourage you to go and spend a day or a half a day and listen to the arguments. It's fascinating. Superior Court gets such a broad array of things that you can listen to and hear. Commonwealth Court is the other intermediate appellate court. It also sits in Philadelphia, in Harrisburg, and in Pittsburgh. And it hears actions that are either brought by or against the Commonwealth, appeals from decisions that are made by state and local agencies, and then some of the appeals from the Courts of Common Pleas. For example, zoning appeals would go to the Court of Common Pleas first, and then they would go to Commonwealth Court. A lot of times when you see things about statutes, you're seeing things that are coming from Commonwealth Court. If you are challenging whether a statute violates the law, whether it was done unconstitutionally, that challenge is going to go to Commonwealth Court. If you're challenging one of the agencies, you're going to go to Commonwealth Court. Next slide. So these are the judges from Commonwealth Court, and there are two candidates that are coming up for election on this ballot to join these judges as Commonwealth Court judges. The Commonwealth Court was founded in 1968, and as I mentioned before, it's something that Pennsylvania has that others don't. And it one of its functions is to adjudicate election issues. So if there are issues that come up next Tuesday, those issues will go sometimes to the Court of Common Pleas first, but then they'll go to the Commonwealth Court. And so the Commonwealth Court has people around the clock on election day to hear challenges. If there are objections to nominations and whether somebody can be on the ballot, that also goes to Commonwealth Court. Next slide. And this is Superior Court, which was founded in 1895. And you recall I said that they are one of the busiest courts. They sit in panels of 3, but you can see how many judges it takes to handle all the cases that there are. And those judges can sit all over the state. So whether the judge is from Pittsburgh, this judge can still sit in Philadelphia. Same's true with the Commonwealth Court. They can sit all over the state, and they also sit in panels of 3, or what's called an en banc panel, which has 7 judges on it. Next slide. So this is the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's courtroom in Harrisburg. It is an absolutely gorgeous place. Strongly recommend, or actually, I don't think this is the Harrisburg one, but the Supreme Court has courtrooms in Philadelphia, in Pittsburgh, and in Harrisburg. The Harrisburg courtroom is in the state capitol. It is absolutely beautiful. And it is the state court that is the highest court. It is the one that has the final adjudicator of the Pennsylvania Constitution. And so if you are asking for the Pennsylvania Constitution to be enforced, this is the place where you will get the final answer as to what the Pennsylvania Constitution says. Now, in most cases, the Supreme Court has discretion to hear appeals. It is not a court of initial review, except for certain categories. If a case starts in the Commonwealth Court, which has both original and appellate jurisdiction, then it will go to the Supreme Court automatically. And if it's a death penalty case, it will also go to the Supreme Court automatically. And part of the reason for that is something that is also special in Pennsylvania. Article 5, Section 9 of the Pennsylvania Constitution says that you have a right to appeal from a court to a court. And that means that you cannot be told, you've been to court once, you have to stop. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court also has what's called King's Bench, an extraordinary jurisdiction. You may remember that there was a time when there was a scandal involving juvenile delinquency centers. That was heard by the Supreme Court because it has supervisory authority. And so it's a matter that they wouldn't want to have go just through the courts of common pleas and then up to the appellate courts and then up to the Supreme Court. And so that's something where you can say, hey, this is so important that I need you to hear it in the first instance, or to take it away from a court of common pleas to hear it. Next slide. This is the justices on the Supreme Court. As you can see, there are only 6. There are supposed to be 7. This is also an election year for the Supreme Court. There are 2 candidates who are running for the Supreme Court. And I should have mentioned that there are also candidates running for the Superior Court. I think we have 4. No, we have, yes, we have 4 candidates for Superior Court.
Yes, there's 1 spot open for Supreme, there's 2 spots open for Superior, and there's 1 spot open for Commonwealth.
Okay. So remember, you've got choices for all of these, and these are important choices. As you look and you see that there are 7 people sitting here, 6 people sitting here, we have had a number of opinions that have come out recently as 3-3. Because you didn't have a 7th vote. So what you are doing in this election is putting that 7th vote, which can be the difference, and make it 4-3. So it is very important to look at who the candidates are. And I know that there was a recent candidates forum that Pennsylvanians for Modern Court sponsored. And I think that we're going to put in the chat the links to that, because it was also recorded. And if you did not get to watch it or participate, you should go and see what that candidate forum said so that you know what to do when you vote on Tuesday. Can we put that in the chat? I see as I'm looking at the chat that there's a question here about Commonwealth Court. And there are multiple answers to that question. If a judge in Commonwealth Court is hearing a case in its original jurisdiction or certain election cases, it will be one judge that will hear it. When the court is in its appellate jurisdiction, it hears it in 3 judge panels. And in all cases, the parties are circulated to the court first. So a court can say, wait a minute, I have a conflict. I can't sit on this panel. And then they'll put one of the other judges on the panel. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. So the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is a court, but it also is an administrative agency in that it has supervision over the bar admission. So it regulates how that is done. It has supervision over the funds that are, we call them IOLTA, those IOLTA funds. It has a judicial conduct board, which evaluates any kind of allegations of wrongdoing against judges. It also, through its administrative office of the Pennsylvania courts, is responsible for educating judges. It will teach new judges and it will train ongoing for every judge. So there are state trial judges conferences where all the judges are brought together for continuing education. It also budgets for the court system. And then the Supreme Court has different committees, boards, and advisory groups that are made up of judges and lawyers. I actually have the honor of sitting on the appellate court procedural rules committee by the grace of the Supreme Court. And it's a chance for people, you can write in. There's a website on AOPC where you can write in and say, hey, this rule frustrates me. I'm not sure, this rule is very confusing. And the staff at the AOPC will look at that and determine whether the rules committee should consider changing a rule to accommodate and make it better, because the goals of all of our rules are that they serve everybody. And if there's a reason that the rules don't, we want to know that and fix it. So there's a civil rules committee, an orphans court rules committee, a procedural rules committee for criminal, and then appellate and minor courts and family courts. So all of them have their own separate rules committees, all of which are under the supervision of the Supreme Court. Go on to the next one. So it's very interesting that the women are well represented on the bench in Pennsylvania. Commonwealth Court in particular has more women active judges than it has men judges. And it is not unusual for me to go in front of a panel of Commonwealth Court and have only female judges on it. It's a really interesting experience. The Superior Court also is well represented by women, and our Supreme Court has 3 justices who are women, all excellent jurists. Go to the next one. So in the United States Supreme Court, everybody knows the United States Supreme Court, the highest court in the land. It will hear federal constitutional issues. It will hear disputes between states, and it will hear certain cases that come up with federal issues that it needs to address. Underneath it are the United States Courts of Appeals. But the United States Courts of Appeals are by region. So for example, we are in what is called the Third Circuit. And the Third Circuit encompasses Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Virgin Islands. Those places become in Pennsylvania, become a circuit court of appeals, and it hears all of the appeals that come up from the district courts and bankruptcy courts that sit within its district. And it then goes from this circuit up to the United States Supreme Court. There are two specialty courts, the Federal Circuit, which hears mostly intellectual property and certain kinds of trade cases and veterans cases. And then the DC Circuit, which hears kind of like our Commonwealth Court, hears a lot of the administrative agency cases. And so other than that, most of the courts are geographic. So if you're in the Ninth Circuit, you're in California, you're in the Ninth Circuit. If you're in Illinois, you're in the Seventh Circuit. If you're in New York, you're in the second, and in Boston, you're in the first. So you can know where you are, and that will tell you what courts of appeals you're going to be in. So diversity jurisdiction can get you into federal court, even on a question of state law. But in order to do that, everybody on the one side has to be from someplace, and everybody on the other side from somewhere else. You can't say, I'm a Pennsylvania company suing a Pennsylvania company, and I'm going to go to federal court. If you're a Pennsylvania company suing a Pennsylvania company about Pennsylvania state law, you're going to be in Pennsylvania state court. They are also, in order to get into federal court on diversity, you also have to have more than $75,000 in controversy. And if you don't have diversity jurisdiction, the question itself needs to be a federal question. Bankruptcy court is a separate court. It's authorized separately. It's not the same as the district courts. And in order to go from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to the US Supreme Court, you need to have an issue of federal law. So what's interesting is that just last term, the United States Supreme Court heard a case that had come from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court was considering whether the federal Constitution invalidated a state statute. And it determined that it did, and the Supreme Court reversed and said that federal law did not invalidate the state statute. Really fascinating kind of way that, it goes from one Supreme Court to the next. Can we go to the next slide? Okay. So Pennsylvania has the three districts, which are the Western, the Middle, and the Eastern District. But as I said, all of the judges sit in all of those districts. And so it doesn't really matter that there are those jurisdictions, except that you might file your brief or be more likely to be scheduled for argument in the district in which you reside. Although I have been to Harrisburg and to Pittsburgh many times for arguments. So they don't always schedule the argument where you reside, but they can. But that will tell you where, for example, if you wanted to see the Supreme Court Prothonotary, the Supreme Court Prothonotary has 3 offices. The Superior Court has 3 offices, and the Commonwealth Court has 3 offices. So you could go to a Commonwealth Court, Supreme Court, or Superior Court office in any of those districts. The Third Circuit, as I mentioned, is right here in the green. And I showed you where it has the Virgin Islands, and then it has New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. Okay, we can go to the next one. So the federal courthouse is at 6th and Market Street. It's right down near Old City. And the Third Circuit sits there, and the Eastern District of Pennsylvania sits there. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to talk about election of judges in Pennsylvania next, but I wanted to invite anybody who had a question about this part of the presentation. It'd be good to ask it now.
I don't see any.
Okay, well, let's go on to the next slide then. So the first time, and right now, both of the people who are running for Pennsylvania Supreme Court, this will be their first time in that court if they're elected. Once they're elected, they have a 10-year term before they have to stand for retention. And a retention vote is like a reelection in that you can have other people who run against them, but it is a retention vote, not they aren't running for election in the same way. The intermediate appellate courts also get elected for their first term and then have a 10-year term. And the courts of common pleas also get elected and then have a 10-year term. Now, when we're talking about the Court of Common Pleas, in Philadelphia this time, there are 12 candidates that are running for Court of Common Pleas. There are also 3 candidates that are running for the municipal court. So if you were to look at this, you would say, wait a minute, I'm going to walk into my ballot and I'm going to have 15 people at the lower level, and then I'm going to have 2 people at the Commonwealth Court, 4 people at Superior Court, and then 2 people at the Supreme Court. That's a lot of people who are getting elected this Tuesday or standing for election this Tuesday. And so it can get really easy to think, well, I don't really need to know much. And then get there and look at all the names and say, wait a minute. But it is very, very important who you vote for as judge, because all of them do all of those things that we talked about are in their hands. They are the ones who are adjudicating the issues that affect your lives. Next. So in order to become a judge, you have to be a member of the bar of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, unless you're going for a magisterial district judge that has to take a test. You have to be a resident in your district for a year prior to election. And elections come up in odd years, and they come up through partisan elections. So you go through the primary, and then after the primary, you run in the major election. And the MDJs are the ones who only have 6-year terms. Everybody else has a 10-year term. The Constitution was recently amended to say that you could not serve as a judge after the age of 75. There are, however, senior judges who serve at basically as the Supreme Court allows them to serve. And they only serve part-time and can only do certain things. And they cannot be a part of taking a case en banc. Next slide. So to be a magisterial district judge or an MDJ, you only have to be 21 years of age, a resident of the Commonwealth, a resident of your district for a year prior to election, and either complete training and education or be an attorney. And then you have to complete a practicum course and then do 32 hours of continuing education each year. Okay, next. So on retention elections, they are nonpartisan, so you don't see what party a person was. And it's based upon the record of the prior 10 years of service. And the bar associations make recommendations, and it's interesting. This makes it sound like only for retention elections, but actually the Bar Association interviews candidates for judges and makes recommendations about how those people meet qualifications, temperament, all kinds of things that they assess. So both the Pennsylvania Bar Association and the Philadelphia Bar Association are good places to go for more information about judges. Next slide. So the federal judges are different from the state court judges in that they are elected. They are not elected, they are appointed for life. And the nominating committee will suggest to the senators, who will suggest to the president, FBI, and Justice Department investigation. And then they will have a Senate confirmation hearing. And there's no age limits. They can choose to take senior status, but they don't have to, and senior status kind of lowers the amount of work that they have to do, but they don't have a specific age at which they're required to do that. And there's a different process for magistrate judges and bankruptcy judges who are appointed in a different way and don't have life tenure. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so question. And one question would be, can you name any judge for whom you have voted? Another question would be, do you know any of the judges who are on the ballot for Tuesday? Are you familiar with them at all? And it's really important, I can't stress enough, that you know who it is that you're voting for. If you look at the United States Supreme Court, for example, and the number of opinions that have come down 5-4, there's 9 justices on that court, you know that one vote can make a huge difference in things that matter in every aspect of our lives. And it's equally true with the state court judges. And so I really recommend that you look carefully at who they are and what they will do as a judge. Next slide. So here are the things that you might look at when you're evaluating, and that is the better view of the Harrisburg Supreme Court courtroom. The other one only gave us kind of the front of it and not the beautiful dome. But when looking at it, look at legal experience. And legal experience, I would recommend that you look at it 2 different ways. A person can become a lawyer and then do very narrow things, but a judge gets a broad array of things in front of them. So look at people who have had a lot of experience in doing things that have given them encounters in different kinds of cases and with different kinds of litigants in front of them. Listen, ask around. Do they have a reputation for integrity and fairness? Sometimes cases that come before people are hard, and they need to be able to say, this is the right decision. And a lot of times people want them to make a certain decision, and that's not what the facts before them say. You want people who are going to work with the facts as the facts are. Look at whether they've been involved in the community and given public service. If they're people who care, they are people who will care in the courtroom. What do they do on ongoing educational and professional activities? You know, I've looked at some judges who have done remarkable things with trying to provide civic education. They've gone into public schools. They've put forth different ways to mentor people. I mean, those are excellent things that say that they care about the functioning of our community and really making it work. Compassion. You see on TV all the time the image of the judge who's up there and just, you know, putting that gavel down and doesn't care at all. But you can't administer the law fairly unless you care. And caring leads you to listen and leads you to ask questions. And that's what leads you to making a better and a more right decision. Also, there needs to be a commitment to equal justice. You will hear people, unfortunately, who will get up and say, well, I only care about this group in the community. Well, that's not equal justice. Equal justice says that no matter who you are, you can stand in a courtroom and you will be heard and your facts will be administered within the context of the law. And that's our goal for everyone, that no one ends up in a courtroom feeling like, wait a minute, I just got railroaded. They should all have an equal stand in front of the judges. Okay, next slide. All right, here is where some of the places are where you can find out the information. I mentioned these, the Pennsylvania Bar Association, this is the website. Here's the Philadelphia Bar Association's website. Look at the questionnaires. One thing that I didn't mention is that if you go to the lawyer lookup page, the state has for every attorney, you can see whether there's been proceedings against them or whether they've paid their IOLTA fees, whether they are in good standing. And that's important to know. Okay, next slide. So let's talk a little bit about your role in the court system. You might think that City Hall sits over there and you don't have anything to do with it, but you actually have very many things to do. So let's go to the next slide. So we mentioned at the beginning that trials can be bench trials where the judge decides everything in the case, or they can be jury trials. Jury trials come from the area here. So the Eastern District of Pennsylvania draws a federal jury from an area that includes Philadelphia. Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas draws jurors only from the city of Philadelphia. So if you are given a jury summons, it's because we want all of Philadelphia to be jurors, because that gives us a cross-section of people who are having different views, have different life experience, are in different stages of life, and together they represent the people's common sense. Having a jury, I've been to other countries where jury system is not nearly so strong or non-existent at all. And you don't have any voice except a voice of somebody who's sitting on a bench. But to be able to say, wait a minute, this is a verdict that the jury entered. This is what the people who sat and listened to all the evidence at trial determined what was right, is such an honor. And it's an honor that we keep only when we also are the ones who serve as jurors, just as it is to be able to go in front of a jury. And a jury is a constitutional right in this country, and it's one that we should not take for granted. In civil cases, a jury will have between 6 and 12 jurors. There can also be criminal juries, but there's a third kind of jury, which is an indicting grand jury. An indicting grand jury actually proceeds in secret, and it determines whether there is to be criminal charges filed. Okay, next. So you might think, oh, I don't need to be a juror, or I don't want to be a juror, but don't ignore a jury summons. You can go to the jury room, and what will happen is they will ask if there is hardship. They will ask if there's some reason that you couldn't serve on a jury. So don't think that wait, I have an issue and so I can't, respond to the court. You need to respond to the court. It is actually a legal summons for you to come. So some of the excuses that the law recognizes are those who are in active service in the armed forces, those who have undue hardship, families of criminal homicide victims. There may be other reasons that are specific to a case. If there's something in a case that's very personal to you and you feel like you could not listen impartially, tell the judge that, and the judge will make sure that you sit on a different jury or not at all, because your oath as a juror is to listen impartially. Okay, next. So please vote. I don't know how many times I've said, please look at the candidates, but looking at the candidates is the step before voting. Please
Yeah.
also take some time on Tuesday and go to the polls. We need to have good candidates who become good judges and who help uphold good law. It is critical to the functioning of our system. So please go to the polls on
And you
Tuesday.
can go to our website and there's a button on the website that will, if you don't know where to go to vote, it will bring you to that site and you can put in your zip code and that'll determine where you need to go to vote.
Excellent.
It's really, really important. And the other thing that I just want to add is that, the whatever level of the judiciary that we are voting for in that seat, based on all the years that they're there, they usually, once they make it in on the Commonwealth level, they rise to the next level and to the next level. So don't just think that the highest is the most important to vote for and know about. The entry level is really, I think, crucial because once they get in, they're sort of like there for life.
Well, and that's a really interesting point, because one of the things that people will look at when they look for a Commonwealth Court judge or a Superior Court judge is, was this person a judge on a Court of Common Pleas? And so if the answer is yes, even if they got in because they were, just the first name on the ballot, it gives them a leg up for the next election. And then people will ask, were they on Superior Court or Commonwealth Court when they go to look for Supreme Court? And so it gives them a leg up. So it is important to look at all levels. Can we go to the next slide? Michelle, you want to talk about the benefits?
Yes, I'm so excited about this. So we have a judicial independence benefit every fall. And this fall, it's on November 20th, and it's a hybrid program, although we'd love to see you in person. But it is hybrid. And so for this year, we are honoring the most amazing, amazing judge, Phyllis W. Beck. She is in her 80s. She was one of the founding members of PMC's commission, the reason why PMC exists. So this is her first time being honored. So we're excited about that. And then if you haven't heard of Dawn Porter, you need to look her up, whether you come to the benefit or not. She is a powerful, amazing woman. She will be in person presenting. So it's great to hear her speak and her passion and her background and her research. So if you can join us, we would love to see you. There is one question. It says, when can you begin researching these candidates? It seems this information is only published just before the election. I'd like to have more time to learn more about the candidates. So with that said, the minute they go through any candidate, that there's a deadline that a candidate needs to submit and announce that they are running for any position, judiciary position. And then when that does happen, then they go through the process of the assessment of the bar associations. So during that process, when you go to the bar associations, whether it's the PA or the Philly or the Allegheny, depending on where, they will post on their website the minute that candidate has gone through their extensive assessment. So that's how it's usually a couple months before, but not prior to that.
But the other thing to know is that because they're partisan elections, you often know who's running in the primary. And if you find out information about people on both sides of the primary ballot, even though you're only voting on whichever side you're voting, you will then be able to trace those people as they come down to the full election. And so that gives you a leg up.
Right. And PMC had a candidates forum way back in the spring. So that's really where it started.
All right. So can we go to the next slide?
I think that's it.
No, we've got
Oh,
two
there's
more.
one more. Yes.
Look.
You're so good. Thank you so much.
Three
So
more,
this
actually.
slide.
All right. So this one is the survey. And if you
Yeah.
put your cell phone up here, your camera, you can do the QR code and it will give you survey questions, which we would really appreciate your filling that out. And if you go to the next one, it is a thank you to Comcast for its support. And then our final slide has plugs for some of the things that Pennsylvania for Modern Courts does. And Michelle, you want to talk about those three characters?
Absolutely. So PMC Shares is our educational programming. So all the workshops that I talked about. And then we have our PMC Watches program, which is where we train volunteers to go into bail arraignments or preliminary arraignments, and they assess the process, answer questions, submit their information, their findings, and then we create a report, which I just mentioned was just launched, and you can find that on our website. And then PMC Listens is an 800 number for questions about court access. We share a lot of resources on that. We do not give legal advice, but we can provide you with resources so that in order for you to get legal advice. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Alicia, for your time. And thank you, everybody. Thank you, the library. Thanks for joining us. And the recording can be found on the library's website and then also on PMC's website, probably tomorrow or the next day.
And thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Really appreciate having you here.
Yes. Have a great weekend and don't forget to vote.
Yes.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, Maria.
Thank you. Bye-bye.